These are the two separate modules, and you'll be able to see, I think I can pull them out actually before I remove it from the bottom. There's a ribbon connector on here, but if you have to replace one of these modules, you can actually do it without pulling the whole thing out. There's enough room on here to do that. And again, these may be slightly different between the cardiac version of the system and the others, so if you do have to replace one, make sure that it is the same. There will be a couple of buttons over here. For example, there will be one with the waveform and the physio, if it's a cardiac system with the ECG, and these overlays can be pulled off and changed. So if you order a replacement and it has a wrong overlay, you can take that off and replace it. Now I'll show you how these attach and what they look like from the bottom side. Alright, again from the bottom, you can see the freeze run switch, how easy that comes off, and it pops right out. There's nothing in the way over here. Here you can see where you've got the sandwiched assembly, which we're going to be taking off next, and I'll show you what components go on there. Again from the bottom side, you can see the two trays that the two optional panels sit on the side, and the cable runs through here, but again, you can unplug it on either end, so it's easy to replace that without disassembling the piece. This is actually the user interface portion right here. This is the part where all the switches are integral parts of that PC board. This is the sandwiched assembly that has the front panel processor. So you've got the user interface, the UI, and the FPP, the front panel processor, sandwiched on here that makes up most of the user interface assembly together. I'm going to remove the screws here and take off this can and then show you how that whole package comes off. The metal cover on top is primarily just a shield. If you open this, you can see the bottom side of the board, but there's nothing that has to be removed to physically take it apart or cabling. Once the screws are taken out of the outer edges of the front panel processor, it's connected by the plug-in connectors on the bottom. You can gently pull it up. You'll feel it pop right out of the connectors. You can see the bottom. It snaps on with all four connectors here, and that exposes the rest of the assembly. From this point, you can get to the bottom side of the keyboard, which is a separate unit from the entire user interface, and you can also see the remaining of the encoders that can be removed and replaced individually. That will save a lot of time and expense being able to do that. The rest of this, with all the switches on it, these are all an integral part of that board again, and so if you have switches that are just failed, you can take it apart and clean it. That may very well take care of it, and I'll show you that in a moment as well, but other than that, you're stuck replacing the entire unit. There's a rubber membrane down here, or a silicone membrane, which is actually part of the keyboard assembly, and I haven't found that it's being made by any other manufacturer yet, so at the moment you can really only buy this assembly through Siemens or through another party that obtained it through them. We now have the user interface assembly down to essentially its bare bones. There's a few more components that could be taken apart, and I'm going to point those out to you, and I'm going to let you see it from the top side. So we won't have a reason to take it apart today, but let me just show you. You do have a separate keyboard assembly that's over here that I pointed out, so that can be replaced as a unit. This section down here is replaced all as one unit. You have quite a few components to take off, the nuts on the back side if you're going to do that. And the only reason to take that apart any further, because typically you'll order it just as this board or sometimes the entire assembly. The only reason to take that apart is if you wanted to try to clean the switches and see if there is a way to avoid replacing the board. And let me show you from the top side where you can see that and what it would look like. If we remove the small screws all the way around the edge and all the way down the middle, also remove the nuts from the top side of the encoders, you could then separate this whole assembly. And what you'd be looking at then is just this sandwiched portion, and really all you'd see in addition is a silicone membrane that's setting over the circuit board. And I can show you from here exactly what that looks like. If you look at the top portion where the keyboard is, these are actually the silicone pieces that have a small conductive piece on the bottom side. So rather than an integral switch, as you pull this back, what you'll see is a printed pattern on the keyboard. When that small piece of conductive round material in the middle of the silicone, which is insulated, is pushed down, it runs across the membranes of the keyboard itself and actuates a switch and is detected there. So if you have a failure here, the only kind of failure you can have is it's gotten dirt or debris underneath, which is pretty difficult because of the covering on here, but you can see there is room for some to slip in there, or the electronic component that reads that switch has actually failed, in which case you're going to end up replacing the front panel processor board on the back side. And the same look, the same pattern, this whole series all the way along here is what's underneath each and every one of these. If I pop out one of the actuators on top of it, you'll see it's exactly like the keyboard switch up there, only a slightly different size on there. And then you've got a little place for the LED to come through and hit the small fiber optic piece in the actuator itself to light it up. These look identical all the way across here, and if you popped out one of what looks like a toggle switch or a paddle switch, what you'd find is there's simply two of the dimples, one on either side, and it actuates one or it actuates the other by simply pushing it down. Underneath, it's the exact same mechanism as here and here. Haven't been able to find another manufacturer making these for us yet. I suspect there will be somebody doing that soon, but right now the sole source is Siemens or someone who has purchased the refurbished parts for it. And that's pretty much it for the whole assembly. It's pretty complicated when you look at it, but it comes apart pretty easily. It pulls entirely out of the system, so you can set it on your workbench and you can get to it in a well-lighted area. And there's a lot of pieces on here that are fairly easy to work on. You'll also notice that the DGC switches are rather slide pots that I haven't mentioned before. These also tend to get very dirty. And because that's right directly on the switch with a little bit of a filter to stop it from getting directly on there, these will get dirty frequently, and you'll notice that as it jumps around. There's actually a test for the keyboard that you can move these and make sure they have their whole range and don't have any dead spots, and there's even a calibration procedure that's in the system for it, so that you can put them all the way to one side, hit cal, all the way to the other side, hit cal, and I believe down the center. If you flip that over on the back side, if you took that apart, you would be able to see that these slide pots can be desoldered and removed from the system, and that's really the only other component that's on here and the last one that you could easily and readily replace to save some money. And that's it for our user interface for the Accuson Sequoia.